Hey friends, welcome back to Product Management Bits. I'm Krish, a product manager, and today we'll be doing a slightly different version. Today I want to walk you through a framework for product analytical questions or product metrics question. Often in interviews with companies like Google, Meta, they often ask you to, gauge a success of a product. How would you, if a new product is being launched, how would you track the success? What are some of the metrics you're going to look for it, right? So one, today I'll walk you through a detailed framework on how to approach these kind of questions. And then two, in my next video, I'll use this framework to sort of like create an example out of it, right? So let's get into it. Perfect. So thinking about analytical metrics, product sense related question, right? So in general, the framework looks something like this. You should always start with a goal, understand the functionality of the feature, taking a few steps back, understanding what exactly the product is, who is it used for, what was it built for, and who is the target audience, right? So that gives you an understanding of like what exactly the product is. Often, many a times, the product is familiar itself. So in this case, it's for example, if it's like Facebook Pay, Facebook Dating, pretty popular features. The goal here is to sort of like understanding and making sure that passing along that understanding to the interviewer to make sure that they're on the same page. So to make sure that list on those product features and goal. So that's like setting the goal itself, and then next you would understand the goal. Is this a new product? Is this sort of like a retention product? And what exactly are you trying to do here? Why are we setting up a goal in this case, right? So that gives you enough context around like, one, what the product is, who the product was built for, and then what specifically are we trying to gauge the success for, or what exactly are we trying to look for the metric in, right? So that's one. Number two, get into like user journey and what the funnel looks like, right? So this is listing down all the assumptions, and user journey is could be around a particular feature or the entire app itself, right? So let's pick an example. In a case where I'm asked to set a metric for, say, a video conferencing tool like Zoom, I'll first, write down the user journey into like, creating an account, setting up an invite, adding users, going into the meeting, meeting everyone. If the meeting was recording, sharing out the notes and the recording, and then wrapping up. So that's the user journey. That's the funnel. Now, in each one of those user journeys, I can pinpoint specific metrics around the number of users who signed up, or the number of successful meetings, or how long was the meeting held for, and that would give you a good framework to take a deeper dive and show that you don't straightforward jump into like making conclusions, but you're writing it all down. You're making sure that you understand the product and you're asking for questions before you jump onto solutions. Product adoption funnel. Rallies into when you're trying to gauge at one or two steps above. For example, like how do you compare, say, Google Meet versus Zoom? In this case, you can step into, rather than getting into features, then you can step into like what does the adoption funnel look like for Google, for Zoom, and where's the differentiation which you can make? What are some of the metrics you can track in, right? So that's for the user journey part. And then once you have the context, you have set a goal, you know what the product is, you got into the detail of the product, you would then come into the metrics portion. Now, for metrics, often most of the interviewers are really looking for a North Star metric, which then could be broken down into multiple star metrics. And then in a minute, we'll see exactly what North Star metric is. So start with North Star metric, define one or two success metrics tied up with the North Star metric, which is going to make your goal tracking much easier. And then for two or three sided marketplace, often you have to give more metrics. For example, if it's like a Facebook marketplace, there's a sellers, there's a buyer, and then the platform itself, right? So you need to account for like, both sellers and buyers, because even if one persona is not doing well, the platform is going to fail, right? So that's at a high level around like how you go about these metrics. Now let's get into a few key metrics or key families of metrics, right? For each one of these questions, there could be metric or solutions around like, awareness, how popular is my product, acquisition, if a product is new, what percentage of market share do I have I converted or captured, right? How many new users have I signed up for? Activation. Once a product is launched, customers are signed up. What's that one thing which gets them going, right? So activation in that sense. Engagement, like daily active, monthly active, weekly active users. Retention. I have signed up and activated my users successfully. How many of those are retaining? How many of those are sort of like renewing their packages? Churn is a flip side of retention where customers are walking away from your product. And then monetization in terms of like, what's the overall goal and how am I tracking the success of like a particular feature from a monetization standpoint. And then finally, referral, which refers to like, customers are paying, they're retaining, now they love your product. They want to start talk about your product in different forums. So that points to more of like the referral. Now, so these are the top families of metrics. Now, a North Star metric could be any one of these metrics or a collection of these metrics, right? So definition of North Star metric, I took a stab at it, is like one single metric, which is the most important and tying everything together, right? It's sort of like the setting guide, which drives multiple teams and goals, right? The reason why it's called North Star, it's like, that's something very, very up above, and everyone is trying to get to that goal itself, right? So it should be representing 5 or 6 sub-metrics and then driving multiple product and features. An example of North Star metric is, weekly learning users. A user is active and 2 other people have consumed that content. That could be a sort of like for a learning platform. Weekly active explorers, in this case, like, a user completes one search and gets an answer. So those are like small example of North Star metric. For example, for my YouTube channel, maybe a North Star metric could be the total number of minutes watched on content, right? So that metric it in itself tells me that, the videos which I'm creating, one, they are really effective and adding more value to the product community out there. But at the same time, that would also break down into like, number of subscribers and, total watches and referrals and all of that, right? That speaks for it. So that North Star metric of total number of minutes watched speaks for all of it. So many a times, in my personal experience, I've also tried to experiment to influence the North Star metric, creating A/B tests to understand and hypothesizing multiple different scenarios around, trying out this packaging style or trying out, different approaches and then going from there. Cool. So now that we have talked about, at a very brief, what the framework looks like, what are some of the examples of these metrics? Let's get into a few sample metrics itself, right? And I've just taken like random example here, but you can adopt to this framework in your interview, right? So for example, a metric category could be health of the product, right? So a question you can ask to set the metric is the product performing reliably? That is going to speak to the health of the product. A few metric examples would be like, latency, uptime, load, and as a stretch goal, you can always ask like, who's the owner for this metric? Is it the product team? Is it the eng team? And go from there, right? Usage. How are customers really using and engaging with your product, right? So be it completing a certain action, taking certain steps, or your daily active, monthly, weekly active users, right? And for something like this, because it's an end-to-end, right? So engineering, product design, all become stakeholder there. New user adoption. Are new users adopting to the product? What is the number of users? And the reason why marketing is a owner over here is because the product teams have done their job. Now it's in terms of like how are we getting the word out and curtailing to the market out, right? Retention, are users coming back? Outcome, what is the overall business result? Satisfaction, this talks to like the net promoter scores, the CSAT score, all of that, right? It's in my opinion, starts with user research, but boils down to multiple of these product teams. And then finally, it's more around like, engineering productivity and happiness. This is more of an internal metric to gauge the success of like, how are the teams performing. Cool. So there we have it. We talked about a couple different things here today. Hopefully this video was helpful. To give a quick wrap up, always start with setting the goal, understanding the product, making sure your assumptions are listed down, getting a buy-in from the interview. Once you do that, get into the specific details of the user journey of any given product, write it down. Once you do write it down, it's going to give you a good chance of understanding, the product itself. And then finally, getting into metrics. We saw a few families of metrics. We saw what North Star metric is. We saw a few examples. And then finally, we also saw a few examples of like, how would you approach it in the interview, right? So, right, starting with, the category of the metric, the description of the metric, example, and then who is the suggested owner. So next video, we will use this exact framework, and we will get into using the framework to in a real example. So looking forward for the next one. Hopefully this video helped. If you did, drop a comment to leave me your thoughts on this video. And if you need access to this doc, drop a comment as well. See you next time. Thanks.